The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
When the Facts Change is brought to you by the Spin-off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBank, the bank for Kiwi looking to get ahead in business and in life. A bank that delivers expertise in banking know-how, smart advice for business owners wanting to invest, grow their business or diversify. A bank that adapts with technology through the lens of its people and customers. It is a bank with heart that is driven by its purpose. Kiwi, making Kiwi better off. There's one idea I often turn to when I'm trying to understand a particular problem. It's the phrase hedonic adaptation. Just remember that, hedonic adaptation. This is the idea that, let's say you've suddenly got a windfall of cash or your income has increased. Almost amazingly, your spending rises almost automatically to fill the space. So it's not like at the end of the month you've suddenly got, a spare $1,000 because your income went up by $1,000. By the end of the month, you often find yourself exactly where you were before you got the higher paid job, which is not much money left. And you think, how did that happen? It's this idea that humans, somehow we manage to fill the gap, fill the space. I often think of it like the foam that you pump into the wall through the hole to insulate your house. It's a foam that goes in there and then it expands to fill the gap. That's hedonic adaptation. And in work, we're often seeing that now where the foam expands into all parts of our lives. This week on When the Facts Change, I speak to Megan Alexander, who is the managing director of Robert Half. They're a recruitment company that specialise in tech and in finance and have had to deal a lot over the last 3 or 4 years with this idea of hybrid work. This is where, post-COVID, people are often working, let's say 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or maybe it's 4 days in the office and 1 day at home. And it tends to be the Mondays and Fridays where we do the hybrid. And a lot of people, employees in particular, love the idea because it means you get an extra day at home. It means maybe a couple of hours a day where you're not commuting. It means, being able to be there when the parcels are delivered. And for a lot of people, it works really well. And for employers as well, or some employees, because there has been some employers, because there has been a backlash in the last couple of years to the point where it's become part of the political debate. It helped bring down Peter Dutton, the Liberal Party opposition leader in the most recent Australian election. He went all hairy-chested and said that public sector employees would all have to work from the office from now on and provide good value for money for taxpayers. And of course, we've heard Nicola Willis argue that a lot of Wellington employers in the public service should go back into the office as much to give a boost to the Wellington CBD businesses. However, often employees aren't that keen. And there's a tension that goes on there. This week on When the Facts Change, we find out about how that foam fills those gaps, which employers are best at making it easy to work from home in that hybrid way, and also how to improve your ability to get those jobs and keep those jobs once you're there. This week on When the Facts Change. Well, kia ora, and welcome to Megan Alexander, who's with us from Robert Half, the recruiting company, who's done some really interesting research into what's happening in the workplace around working from home, hybrid work. So, Megan, welcome into When the Facts Change.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really interested in how our worlds have changed since COVID and how the idea of work has shifted, particularly in where we work, how we work, whether we think other people are working or not, whether we think it's fair. And so this area of hybrid work I find fascinating. Could you tell us, firstly, how workers in Aotearoa think about hybrid work and how they think it changes or affects their productivity?
Yeah, I think the first thing to recognise is that when people talk about flexible work, they get flexible and hybrid quite confused. And so, I would describe hybrid as whether you have a policy, or if you're an office worker, where you can do a couple of days or one day at home, for example. So often we see sort of a 3-2 model being 3 days in the office, 2 at home, or a 4-1. And flexible being more about, hey, you're supposed to be in 5 days, but if the plumber's coming this week, then, you can work from home that day. So it's less structured, if you like, but more accommodating to people's individual needs around family life, etc., whether the kids picking up kids and those sorts of things. And so there is a distinct difference between the two. And so you've got to be very careful when you talk about this, because when you say flexible, people assume hybrid, which is not always the case.
Yeah. So, there used to be a accepted practice that, when you were hired for a job and that job had a workplace, you'd be coming in, whether it be 9 to 5, and sometimes contracts used to specify it,
Yep.
8:30 till 5 or whatever, half an hour for lunch or an hour for lunch.
They still do. Yep.
Yeah. How are, you do quite a bit of recruitment. You'll see some of these contracts and know the best practice. And of course, it's different for every industry. But, what sort of terms are being put into contracts? Whether it's hybrid or whether it's flexible or, what?
Yeah, look, I think interestingly enough, hybrid and flexibility often aren't in contracts. It's more of a policy document, right? And so I have seen employees or candidates turn down a job because it's not in a contract, despite an employer actually saying, well, we all practice this policy. I can guarantee you 100% that it works, but because it wasn't contractual, the individual didn't sign the contract. So I would say it's less contractual. We don't see much of it in the physical contract, but it is what people are actually doing. And we've certainly seen a whole evolution since COVID of this topic. It hasn't stayed static.
And what do employees think about how it affects their productivity? Because, there's a variety of views, and I'm curious about what employees think.
So employees think, about 70% of Kiwi employees think that they are more productive if they have a hybrid work arrangement, right? What I typically see at Robert Half is no one really wants to work 5 days at home, which is what they had to do during COVID. And the reason people cite that is that they don't have the human interaction. And so there was certainly a big shift away from most people wanting that kind of work. There's the odd one here and there, but the majority of people want typically either a 3-2 or 4-1, as they deem that to be more productive.
And what do employers think of this? Because, during COVID, they had no choice. And then, there was a real shortage of staff immediately after COVID, and people were like, oh, I'll do anything I can to keep this person. So, but then, we've got rising unemployment now. So how are employers seeing this?
Yeah, it's really changed, right? So when we were in the height of a very active employment market, no one could get staff or struggled to get staff. Companies recognised that hybrid was really something that was very, very high on the candidate list, right? And so they actually moved to having hybrid models on offer just to be attractive. with the economic changes that have happened, certainly there has been quite a swing back. And so it is not uncommon for 5-0, i.e. 5 back in the office, to be in play. And I'd probably say 80% of my jobs today that I recruit for are back in office 5-0. So it's very, very distinct. Now, some of the larger corporates and multinationals are typically the companies that have held on to a 3-2-4-1, but more often than not, they've gone back to a 4-1 model. And SME New Zealand never really, they begrudgingly took on the hybrid, and then when they don't have to have it, they've gone back to 5-0.
So why do you think that is? Why are the international big employers, the ones who, they think deeply about their HR policies, they may even do some analysis on productivity, why is their view more friendly, if you like, towards hybrid than SMEs and, purely New Zealand organisations?
Yeah, and I think, look, this isn't just a New Zealand thing, it's something we're seeing globally. And so I think it's because when you've got less staff and you have half the workforce at home, then it has a real impact. Whereas if you've got thousands of employees and you've got half at home, you've still got hundreds of employees. And so it was actually a lot around the erosion of culture. We heard, as a recruiter, lots of companies talking about culture and how that it was just being hugely negatively impacted. Also, I think when you've got small teams functionally and you've got the person sitting at home, out of sight, out of mind, whereas in a large company, you might have 2 or 3 people doing the same function so it can be covered by other members of the team. So every function still has someone in the office for the rest of the business to communicate with.
How much of it, though, is some employers not really believing their employees are actually doing work if they can't see them doing work?
Look, I think that's quite an old school view, and I think a lot of employers don't think like that anymore. And it's kind of interesting because as I go around the traps, I hear very little of that. I hear things like, well, if someone's going to be unproductive, they'll be unproductive in the office and at home, right? So it's actually not about that, I don't think. I think most people are actually more concerned about they called it the water cooler conversation during lockdown. The collaboration, the ability to turn around and get quick answers and be able to sort of problem solve on the fly when everyone's so busy. And so I think that's been a huge element that people have felt have been missing. The other piece that I've heard a lot of managers talk to me about is not having to wait 2 or 3 days to call a team meeting when everybody's in together so it can be done, right? Or being able to call out something that they really want to do real time and then having to sit and wait, at which point you've sort of lost the mojo of what that was about. And so, it's those elements that employers have cried out for and made this sort of stance back into offices. Whereas, look, this is all dependent on what job function you're talking about. There are some jobs that are better suited to a hybrid model than others. And so the highly collaborative job functions, it's sort of not sitting particularly well. In a job like a finance business partner, for example, where they're having to support operational warehouse managers, the warehouse managers are on the ground. How do you support that sitting at home? So those are the sorts of conversations that we're hearing as to why employers are finding it frustrating.
It's interesting how this issue has become part of the often sort of political debate, and it's become co-opted, if you like, by a sort of anti-woke brigade. And we saw it a bit in America, where we saw the likes of Elon Musk say, everyone at Tesla must work in the office 5 days a week. And in Australia, the opposition leader, or then and now ex-opposition leader Peter Dutton, made some pretty strong comments about getting public employees to, get back into the office and do their work and provide good service for their taxpayers' money. And it turned out that a lot of voters, particularly women, and there was obviously an issue with the Liberal Party in Australia not being necessarily totally popular with many women, including some who'd previously supported the Liberal Party and were now voting for independent candidates, so-called teal candidates. But how useful or how real do you think this co-opting of the working from home thing into politics, the discussion of politics, is?
Look, I think each company has to do what's right for their company, and it shouldn't become a political issue, right? And so, certainly I can't really comment on politics, but I think how organisations get their staff back to work is incredibly important, and understanding that every individual is different, and how do you make it work for your environment, your company, and what you stand for is really, really important. So I think it shouldn't be in a political arena. It should be around what's best for that company.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that some employers were worried that people out of the office a lot were not becoming part of or contributing to the company's culture. I've always been curious about that word. I hear it a lot in sports commentary, actually. Coaches and captains are the culture of this organisation. What does culture mean in your view? Because you will see lots of different types of organisations and cultures, and I'm curious about what you think that means.
Yeah, look, I think it's how people come together and actually interact, right? And so, if everybody's in a silo and working in silos, there's not much of a culture, i.e. people having a common purpose and coming together. And so, obviously, communication is a huge part of a culture. There are many forms of communication, and I guess it's the unstructured conversation that creates the heartbeat of a company. And I think that's the piece that a lot of employers are talking about when they talk about it being missing is the informal communication, and being able to do things on the fly and grab someone and have that conversation. Hey, what do you think, kind of thing. And so it's that's crept away, which is why companies have wanted to bring that back.
There is a lot of volatility and uncertainty out there, particularly offshore. But you know what? There's some good news. The New Zealand economy is recovering from a deep and painful recession. This year is predicted to be better than last, and 2026 looks even brighter. Lower interest rates are fueling a recovery, easing the cost of living and creating opportunities for businesses. Learn more about New Zealand's positive economic outlook at kiwibank.co.nz.
You know that feeling when someone shows up for you just when you need it most? That's what Uber is all about. Not just a ride or dinner at your door. It's how Uber helps you show up for the moments that matter. Because showing up can turn a tough day around or make a good one even better. Whatever it is, big or small, Uber is on the way. So you can be on yours. Uber, on our way.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Also, when it comes to which companies are best at managing hybrid environments, there'll be some who have particular practices or tools or ways of doing things without, mentioning names and things. You'll see right across the market. What type of tactics or tools seem to work best with hybrid?
Yeah, I mean, certainly those companies that have adopted like team meetings on the likes of Teams or Zoom, etc., and make them regular events, and you've got to have your camera on so people actually see you. Those sorts of things are really, really important. And I think it's that culture of making sure that a person that's working from home is completely attached to the day-to-day business. And so that they are, if someone's trying to get hold of them, they are absolutely able to get hold of them. One of the things that I hear a lot of is, someone's working at home and the person in the office can't get hold of them. It's very frustrating because you haven't got eyes. And so then you're going, where are they? How can I get hold of them? I need a solution. At the same time, you've got, people need to be able to go to the toilet or go and have lunch and things. So it's actually being able to make sure that people are saying, well, and communicating their whereabouts if they are ducking out, etc. And I guess that's the mistrust that starts to creep in. So having really clear communication lines. I hear a lot of employers or teammates, etc., saying, well, I'll just give it to the next person because out of sight, out of mind, right? And they don't even think about the person at home because there is an element to that. But at the same time, on the contra, I hear employers saying, well, I'm really much more productive because I've just dropped 2 hours of travel time that I might have had, particularly in Auckland, right? And so, that's where I think when you do surveys, a lot of the Kiwi workers feel that they are more productive because they've actually dropped the travel time and can be effective in that time. On the contra, I have heard lots of reasons as to why people would want to work from home, from I've got to pick up the kids, I've got a 10-month-old baby to look after. And, the cynic in me and sort of certain hiring managers would be like, well, how are you looking after a 10-month-old baby when you're actually supposed to be working? That's quite a hard ask, depending on your job, of course. So that's where some of the cynicism comes in.
And the other thing I wonder is how particularly young employees, perhaps who don't own their own homes, perhaps they're in a small home, it might be a studio apartment, or all they've got is their bedroom, and the kitchen or the lounge, that's for everyone else, and there may only be one couch.
It's an interesting topic, that one, because yes, we have seen the young ones actually starting to get right back into offices for exactly those reasons. And so I actually think, and I don't have the statistics behind this, but I hear a lot of middle-aged people actually being the ones that want the hybrid working, and the young ones have actually now swung around. What the young ones did ask for when we were coming out of COVID was they wanted to be working for a progressive company. And so they associated hybrid as progressive. But as things have calmed down post-COVID, I don't really hear that verbiage as much anymore. But it is interesting that the young ones actually want the social environment. They want the manager to be learning off. And because it is very different than when we all went into a COVID lockdown, because actually you had your established teams. But when you're now got people moving in and out of jobs, you've got new starters, you've got onboarding, etc. It's actually, people are complaining that it's actually quite hard to onboard new staff. So those are some of the other issues that we start to see.
Yeah, and have we seen employers take into account the real costs of working from home? Employers spend a lot of money on leasing office space and connecting up telecommunications arrangements and buying desks and having pot plants and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, in a way, people have to reinvent that at home or reuse their stuff and may not be able to, claim it for tax reasons. Are you seeing sort of that reflected in employment agreements or pay arrangements or decisions about, IT, making sure everyone gets their own laptop or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen it in some companies. We saw a lot of this during the actual lockdown, because actually health and safety became actually a big topic for employers. Because actually, if you've got staff working at home and then they haven't got the right setup of desk, etc., you've got a health and safety issue. And so then that became a bit of a nightmare, right? And so then this whole thing around, well, we're nearly having to do two, every employer at home and then one in the office is very costly. And so I've actually seen less of that kind of financial piece nowadays, although there's still some companies that will give employees allowance to make sure it is set up, but it's nearly expected that you'll have a setup now that we're so far through the COVID era.
It must be slightly frustrating if you're relatively young, you can't afford your own home office, and you're competing for the one kitchen table with three other.
Yeah, it's quite difficult, right? And so, yeah, that's why I actually do think the younger generation have started to swing back into the office environment.
Yeah, you've also released in the past research on burnout. Now, this has been a hot topic in the last couple of years, particularly at that time when there were staff shortages and in the aftermath of COVID, all sorts of, grief in supply chains and various other things. And we talked about burnout. And one of the complaints I hear sometimes about working from home is that it can be quite isolating. Humans are social animals. How are companies thinking about that issue of burnout in relation to hybrid work?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting thing because some people say that when they work at home, they actually don't leave their desk, and then 5 o'clock hits, and then they actually carry on working till 7 because they've lost that travel time, and so they're actually working longer. So we definitely saw that during COVID and coming out of it, and so that is one of the reasons why many people have actually opted to get back into offices so that they can have the separation between work and home. So, and burnout now it's kind of interesting. Like I think in the world of tech and finance, which Robert Half specialises in, we're seeing people working longer hours than ever because when we came out of COVID, obviously it was job rich. There were lots of jobs, and so people didn't need to put up with long hours. But now we're in an economic cycle that's actually a lot more challenging, and people are actually a little bit more appreciative to have a job. And so they are, and organisations have stripped costs back to running quite lean teams in New Zealand. And so it's actually putting burnout pressure back on people yet again.
Yeah, I'm curious. There's a trade-off there. My background is in economics, and the first thing I always say is there's a trade-off, and it depends.
It totally does.
Yeah, and if you're an employer and, maybe you're really focused on your bottom line and it's all about producing the same amount, at least in the short term, with fewer people and the same amount of pay, it can be tempting to, just squeeze everyone a little bit harder. But, how are some more longer term focused businesses thinking differently about that or measuring differently?
Yeah, look, I think there's been an evolution in the workforce, and certainly there's good employers and not so good, right? So those that are doing it really well actually put value on their people, and they really do. They understand that actually the bottom line is affected by culture, and so if you ignore culture, and i.e., so your people, then the bottom line is going to get impacted at some point and quite significantly. So those that actually focus on looking at productivity, looking at the bottom line, I think are running a very short game. And those that look at potentially, even if it's not hybrid, but flexible practices and looking at burnout and maybe it's like saying, hey, you've been working really hard, why don't you finish at 2 o'clock this Friday? Small things that go a long way can really make a difference. So if you look after the people, you'll generally look after the bottom line.
Just finally, I've got a couple of daughters trying to get into the workforce with degrees and struggling a bit, I have to say. And I always ask people who know more than me what I should tell them. And particularly around working from home, the one thing I have really noticed now that I do a lot of this sort of thing, interviewing people over the internet, so to speak, is that you really notice that, the quality of the lighting, the quality of the audio, the backgrounds that people have, and also, how good their broadband is and how sophisticated their laptops are. What sort of advice would you give to, people who are looking to get a job so that they're at their best in hybrid?
Yeah, I think the first thing is it amazes me how people approach an interview in this day and age. There's so much online, and to your point about lighting and backgrounds and all sorts, right? I've seen it all. I've seen people doing job interviews in their cars with holding their mobile phones. It blows my mind. And so I always say to people, think about, how you turn up to an interview. You need to go back to thinking like how you would turn up to an in-person interview when you do it online. And so all those things are really, really important, I think. And then when you get in there, look, there is an element when you're a graduate. At the moment, the young graduates are actually struggling to find work because, again, they don't have a lot of work experience at a time when employers are generally looking for people to hit the ground running. And obviously, as a graduate, you need a learning and development time, right? And so it is challenging. So the first thing I'd say they need to be absolutely resilient around applying and be relentless on applying for appropriate jobs. Then they need to turn up to the interviews well prepared. And then when they do get those jobs, my advice to a young person would be a soak, be in that office and show and demonstrate your desire to learn and take on anything. And those things will get noticed. Now, obviously, if your company's doing hybrid, you need to follow suit. So you kind of got to look around you and be emotionally intelligent about your environment of what people expect, and then go over and beyond it. And it will pay off.
Megan Alexander, who is the Managing Director at Robert Half, thank you very much for being on When the Facts Change.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
When the Facts Change was brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network, together with KiwiBank. Visit kiwibank.co.nz to find out how KiwiBank are making Kiwi better off.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.